And we're back. Welcome to Abstractable. This is a podcast for entrepreneurial spirited people, full stop. In it, we distill the ideas from the world's best thinkers in business, startup, psychology, sports, foods, the arts, all sorts of places. And in today's episode, we talk about the book Built to Sell by John Warrillow.
We talk about the trap that many business owners fall into when they start and operate their business. We talk about building products and how they differ from services, and how to scale up your business without sacrificing your entire life. And it's also important to talk about some of the drier stuff, which we do. We talk about risk, cash flow, pipeline, and metrics, but super important.
So really selling it.
Yeah, selling it. So why? Building a sellable business is critical, even if you don't want to sell your business. And we'll tell you why. Even though building businesses provides a lot of meaning, it can be grueling work. And so it's about trying to work out how to leverage out your time. So don't forget, you can check out full video from our episodes on YouTube and check out the show notes there as well. So if you do enjoy the episode, feel free to share it around with those that may also enjoy it. We hope you enjoy it. I started the Amazon shareholders letters, Amazon letters to shareholders this week. So I've been told to read this many times, and so they start from 1997, and which was, I presume, the year that they went public, and then I'm about up to 2006 or so. Incredible, absolutely incredible. I have learnt so much already in the just in the few years that I've tackled, and I haven't even got into the latest decade yet. You know, it's very forward thinking.
Good fodder for episodes.
There's plenty of fodder in there for an episode, I think, mate. I think we're definitely going to do an episode on the collection of shareholder letters. Maybe we can do a decade at a time or something.
Really drag it out for the listener. So I have read his book, or the book about him, called The Everything Store, and that was really interesting.
Okay.
But it was probably written maybe 10 years ago or something, so a lot's happened since then. But yeah, his interest in putting his idea of customers and the way he decided to scale the business and not really make any profit is pretty unique. And look, it hasn't got the best PR rep, I don't reckon.
Yeah, tell me more about that, mate.
Well, I don't know. I just feel like people hate him.
I think you're right.
As opposed to like someone like Musk, who people have different opinions about, but I'd say mostly he has more of a positive rep than negative. Whereas old Jeff, he struggles.
Yeah, you are 100% correct. I think just being part of the Billionaires Club automatically gives you the hate flag. There's a flag that immediately erects above you for people to hate on, which you can understand. It's too much money for one single person to have, and then always lead you down to the path of, well, have they made their own fortune? Is it how much luck's involved, and were they just selected by destiny and all these other things? But without a doubt, Bezos versus Musk in the PR landscape is polarizing. Bezos almost seems like a business guy, and Musk seems like the engineer, kind of geeky guy. But the thing is that Bezos has also got that engineering guy about him. He just drives around in Lamborghinis and with women by his hip and all that type of stuff, which probably doesn't bode too well in that PR landscape.
I think it doesn't help him either that he runs these factories, and there seems to be a lot of controversy around all that. And you kind of, true or not, I don't know, I haven't looked into it, but contrast that with his vast wealth, it's never going to look very good, is it? I don't
No.
know where Musk makes his. I know a lot of his battery factories are overseas, but I think the cars are made in America, right?
But mates, the two biggest core competencies that they are developing within their businesses is automation. Like, Bezos's factories are all completely automated, and that's sparking a lot of the controversy around it, is pushing out anyone else that isn't automated in that space. And the outcome of one of Musk's businesses, which I think will prove to be his smaller of his businesses in years to come, although is already one of the biggest companies in the world, Tesla, is moving to automation in not just driving people around, but also logistics, etc. So he's taken that out of the factory now. It's almost like Bezos has the automation handled once you get inside a building. Musk has it handled for everything outside of the building.
The most interesting thing about Jeff Bezos is Amazon Web Services, I think, almost by far. That idea was extremely revolutionary and very different from what he was doing at the time, but basically drove massive parts of the success of Amazon. And yeah, it's just such an interesting idea. To basically outsource cloud or computing power into factories.
This is what separates a company like Amazon, and really arguably a founder or his team of innovators is making a change like that. And we as consumers today take for granted cloud, but cloud would not be what it is if it wasn't for Amazon. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
What do you think about the Amazon interface on their website?
Shithouse.
Terrible.
But AWS is far worse.
Is it just that people are used to it in America, that's why they keep it like that?
I think you've hit on a really interesting point here, mate. I had this conversation the other day. So looking at it from like AWS perspective, you think that was developed in around 2003, 2004 when and it spun out of an internal capability that they were building out themselves. But I think we'll delve into this more when we speak about the shareholder letters. And the so the core competency spun out of doing what they were doing in the cloud space. And mate, I've totally blanked on what the fuck I was just saying.
Awesome. You're talking about that's great. I like that. You're talking about the interface.
Yeah, so
AWS. Sorry, I should have seen you struggling.
Yeah,
and
I was scattering around looking for something. I got distracted, and then I
pad it out well.
So anyway,
did you get a notification or something?
No. I was just looking at my levels on my microphone peaking, and I was like, shit. I hope I haven't blasted Zane's ears off for this episode. So Zane, our producer, for the audience there. So that was developed in 2003, 2004, and you think about what an interface was like back in 2003, 2004. Like, we were using Windows XP or something like that. Smartphones didn't exist. We were still running around with 1 to 9 keyboards to text people and things. So you can imagine what the interfaces were like back then. And so you've got this core developer community that's jumping on board with AWS at this point in time. There's only so much that you can evolve the software without getting potentially millions of developers offside, And this was it's one of those developer orientated solutions, which was huge, much like what Stripe is doing today in the space of payments for developers.
So is it a bit like, brand names that are really famous? You just can't change Vegemite's brand. Is it the same with is it a UX version of that where the interface of Amazon's so familiar to millions and millions of people, and in this case, the developers, that you change it at your own peril, Coca-Cola still looks the same because of that reason.
Well, what's clear about Amazon is they are absolutely relentless on metrics and absolutely relentless on success through all those metrics. And it seems that year on year on year, they've just continued to grow exponentially, and their success metrics grow exponentially year on year. So even with a poor UX compared to some other new, brand new technologies that you see today, I think that they're probably still doing what they need to do. Their number
not
one
the driver of value, is it? Yeah. So.
No, well, but this is the thing: is their absolute number one driver of value and point of interest is the customer experience. But it's maybe not necessarily the user experience, which is probably two slightly different things, because you need to compare the likes of what existed before Amazon in terms of how you went about shopping online. And I think you'd notice a very stark difference as to where we're at today versus where things were at then.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. So we're talking about businesses today with the book Built to Sell.
Yeah, on the topic of products, that would have been a better segue for us.
Well, yeah. Should we redo? So this is a book by John Warrillow.
Yes.
Yeah, you can cut that too, Zane. No, I'm just kidding. This is a book by John Warrillow. And it's about creating a company that is saleable. This is long on the short of it. But it's a super interesting book, and it kind of changed the way you and I thought about building a business. So we thought we'd do an episode on it.
Yeah. We were talking before the episode, mate, about reading, going back through our notes on this particular book and diving back into it. And nothing really seemed too groundbreaking. Nothing seemed too novel in what was being discussed in the book. But I think, as you say, that is because the perspective shift has already happened. And I would say we both look at business in a completely different way. Maybe in combination with reading this book and other things. Because I think this book was a perspective shifter, as you say, particularly when I first read it.
Yeah, 100%. So I guess we can tell you a little bit about Mr. John. So he was born in September 1971, so he's about 50 almost. And he's built and sold 4 different businesses. So he's built and sold a number of different companies and came up with basically a method to do it. And then he kind of turned that method into his career. So he released the book Built to Sell in 2011, which we're reviewing today. And it was recognised as one of the best business books of the year by Forbes and others. He then went on to release a book about creating a subscription business called The Automatic Customer in 2015. And this year, he's already released a book called The Art of Selling Your Business. So you can see where he's kind of heading with his ideas. He has a podcast called Built to Sell Radio, and he basically spends his time advising businesses via a software platform and consulting how to basically build to sell. And his kind of philosophy, which we'll get into in the book, is really about building the kind of business that someone would want to buy, even if you don't want to sell it. And he's got a number of different philosophies around how to do that. He lives in Toronto, Canada. So that's about all we could find on this bloke. He's a bit of a mystery.
Well, he puts his money where his mouth is too, mate, because if you go onto his website, builttosell.com, and it's almost like a schematic for his book in the way he's like selling what he does and their approach. You know, he's got the very like step-by-step process of what they do. And even though he does consulting, it fits the mold of a product, which is one of the huge points which we'll get onto. And so I think that's a positive thing, because he's obviously very successful and he's doing exactly what he says he does, or what others should do, as opposed to you quite often get a lot of these. I feel like you get a lot of people in the space that he might be operating in where they aren't actually doing what they are teaching people to do. You know, it's like, I'm doing this educational course because I need to generate money, as opposed to I'm doing the thing that I'm teaching you in this educational course to get myself money. And the educational course is just a little side thing.
You want to be learning from a practitioner for sure.
Yeah.
And he certainly is that. I would say this book is really aimed at people who run small to medium businesses. And I found it really helpful. So
yeah, I think, mates, even if you're in a larger business, if you're in an enterprise, I think this gives a real insight as to the potential for like an innovation, not the innovation in, quote marks there, air quotes, but in the like real sense of innovation, how you can spin up a new business unit internally. And we were just talking about Amazon. This is something they did all the time, which people don't know about and quite often gets shuffled aside in enterprise because it's just not going to, it seems too small. It seems too insignificant. Whereas this is where your $1 billion business units can come from, little tiny things.
Well, I would also say it's got a lot of relevance in building and running a team. If you're a manager, a lot of these principles, and you're in charge of a section of a company or even just a team that's trying to do something, there's a lot of good stuff here for you to kind of take away and use in your day-to-day. So it's a way of viewing building, effectively a company, but also a team that's executing in some sort of commerce.
Yeah, the actual blurb is quite fitting, mate. It's a nice little hook for us to launch into your first point here. Is most business owners started their company because they wanted more freedom to work on their own schedules, make the kind of money they deserve, and eventually retire on the fruits of their labor. Unfortunately, according to John, most owners find that stepping out of the picture is extremely difficult because their business relies too heavily on their personal involvement. Without them, their company, no matter how big or profitable, is essentially worthless.
Absolutely. That seems to be very much true. So I guess the opening point of his company, his book, apologies, the opening point of his book is really that you want to build a business to sell, even if you don't intend to sell your company. And, from personal experience, I can say that this is a very, very insightful point. Because as you said in that blurb, I think that building a company, it can easily be a trap. It can be a job you can't quit. And it can make you more bound to your job than even if you work for someone else, because you can't kind of let it go when you go home. There's no one else there to do it. It's just you. And the company you likely work for has kind of gone through this sort of evolution and gotten big enough to have some sort of system in place to mean that you can step away. And so a lot of the idea of this book is kind of setting up the way that a small, medium business does run, where it just relies entirely on the owner.
Yeah, and it's almost like an intertwining between the ego of the owner and the actual identity of the business type thing, and somehow, untwirling a little bit of that, in that you don't need to be across absolutely every nook and cranny of what's going on and deliver every single service in that the business is offering. But
yeah, for me, it's like deep. It's even deeper than that. It's sort of like, if you've started a company, you've likely had a thought about your life where you're like, I want something a little bit different. I want either that freedom, or I want to pursue this thing. I don't want to have a boss. So it's something to do with bringing a new type of work that fits with your life. But once you start something, it's very difficult. That can somewhat become all consuming, and running the business is sort of all you think about when you go to sleep and wake up and all that sort of thing. And suddenly the rest of your life kind of drops away if you're not careful. So you need to design your business and your life at the same time. And it's very hard to do, I think. And so I guess now I've run the company I'm part owner in for 6 years, and I've started describing it as like starting a business is a little bit like going for a hike,
Tell us about a hike, Locke.
Well, you put your pack on and you pick to go out somewhere, and depending what trail you pick, it's going to be either really difficult or really easy, or somewhere in the middle. So you're picking your environment, and if you're well trained and well prepared and fit, it's going to be relatively comfortable if the track's fairly comfortable. And so there's an element of preparation that's involved. And I've been on some hikes where I haven't trained at all, and it is absolutely brutal. And once you're out there, there ain't no chopper coming to pick you up. If you've picked something that's a bit hard or a bit difficult, you've got to slog through that. And then on top of that, there's the weather and all the unexpected things that can happen. So you might go hiking and it's just absolutely pouring rain, and it's an absolute misery, as everything gets wet and your tent, and you're like, oh, geez. But you see those people who've done a heap of hiking before and they're kind of strolling through it, no worries, And so the point being that it's kind of a combination of luck, the environment you pick, and your level of preparedness and willingness to kind of stick it out at the same time. That means, how is this actually going to improve my life, or is it going to be something that I kind of wish I'd never done, or am I just going to get lost in the woods? So
I think I really like that analogy, mate, because I think there's also an undercurrent of something else in what you just laid out, which is, I'm not sure what the hiking kind of gradations are, but I'm just going to steal from the world of skiing for a second. You say like green, blue, and black, black being the most challenging. And you are going to naturally see more people on those green hikes. There's going to be a lot more competition around. There's going to be a lot more that you need to tackle. And then when you move out into this, towards those black runs or those black hikes, you are going to be more alone. There's going to be less, which I presume is the more challenging business or the more challenging thing. And it may just be it may not be a challenging in the entire environment of businesses that you can operate. It might be challenging for you and your capabilities as an owner. And so there's potentially less people to help you out in that run, and less people to compare to, which, there's an added challenge there, mate. You haven't got the rails guiding you.
Yeah, greater chance of death too.
Ruin. That's it. That's exactly right.
But probably greater upside. So it really comes back to, I like that, mate. That's a good. I'm going to steal that next time I'm telling this.
Just add it onto your story.
Thank you very much. Plagiarism is my forte. So it's sort of like his approach really is like, hey, stand above it and learn how to build systems and a certain approach to your business so that it doesn't become you get fit and you're one of those people walking through the rain instead of me with my borrowed tent and hiking boots with the 30 kilogram pack, struggling on day two. And it's very much a Ray Dalio sort of build the machine kind of approach. You want to build the machine of your business and make sure you are not the one always cranking the crank to make it all spin.
Look, so for those that haven't been part of the journey since, Cold Hard episode 1 with us, which is the Ray Dalio Principles episode.
Respect if anyone's made it through this far. I love it.
You've done well.
Yeah, gold star.
You have walked the black track.
It certainly has been a long journey. Yeah.
Tell us about the machine, or the Dalio's machine, and how it kind of fits in with this context here.
Well, Ray is the person who wrote Principles, guy who's built the most successful hedge fund in the world, and wrote this book where it basically tells you how he approaches his work blow by blow in only the way that probably someone who's as sort of mathematical and analytical as him could do, which is just in a bunch of steps. And one of his kind of philosophies around building a company is that effectively you're trying to build a machine and that you're putting in place all these different functions of the machine that interact with one another. And your job as the business owner or manager or CEO or team leader or whatever is to basically look down upon that system and design it in a way that it's kind of autonomous. It works like that. So you might have an operations system you might have an HR system, you might have a sales and marketing system or something. And that involves the people who are working there, the processes they use, the customers, how they interact with you. All these things are part of this machine. And you need to make sure that you make it so that thing's running as smoothly as possible and as efficiently as possible.
That's exactly right, mate. And this doesn't necessarily it doesn't just apply to, the biggest hedge fund in the world size business. This applies right down to the sole proprietor and how you implement the systems within your business. So, if you do need to hire someone, if you are making sales calls, you aren't creating it from scratch every single time. You've got maybe some talking points to go to through that hiring process, through that sales process. You've got set templates for how you do things. All this stuff is building that machine. These are the little things you can, and things get a lot more sophisticated as you start bringing in technologies, you start bringing in ways of building culture and people systems. It's very much you needing to make less decisions in that particular moment. You've scaled out your decisions.
So in the book, he talks about this kind of imaginary marketing agency that does all types of different marketing. Basically a customer rings them up, they do whatever the customer asks, and they're kind of pretty good at a lot of things, but the business is struggling to really, break out. And also it all comes back to the owner, all the questions and stuff, because every assignment's very different. It all kind of has to be bespoke each time they do something. They never have really, the customer can kind of ask them whatever they want, and they have one or two really big clients that give them all the work. I think it's called the Stapleton Agency. And the book's kind of revolves. The book kind of revolves around the owner and he goes to a mentor, and the mentor takes him through the steps to transform his company. And probably the first one, Ryan, that you kind of wanted to talk about was kind of something that kind of helps you build that machine.
Yeah, there's one little undercurrent that is throughout this entire book that I think it never gets explicitly called out, which you've just hit on, mate, is how often do people have business mentors? How often do people have coaches and things for their own businesses? And I think the entire story is who's the person that's teaching the main character, the protagonist along the story, in this book. He's always been guided by this coach, this mentor, in the way the story is framed. And I don't think a great deal of, particularly in the small business category, have business coaches or have these mentors that they go to. Is that a fair statement?
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, I think that's generally true. I mean, for me,
you are an exception.
I have, but I'm lucky to have one. But there was a certain point that we got to in our company about 3 or 4, probably 4 years in, where we just got to the point where we said, geez, this is getting really hard. And it's really difficult, feel a bit alone out there trying to figure these problems. And so we appointed an advisory board, and it actually changed everything for us, really, and certainly helped us take the stress out of running the company.
Yeah, and I think that that ties back to what we were just talking about before, which is this. You're like outsourcing a lot of the decisions and a lot of the burden that goes into making decisions, particularly in spaces that you just haven't ventured through before, that you haven't seen before. And I think there's a real power in that. It's not, there's all these rules throughout this book. It's like Ted's rules or Ted's tips, because Ted's the mentor. Yeah, and I don't think it gets called out across all the 20 tips that there are in the book that having a business mentor is probably a crucial one to allow any of those tips to occur in the first place. So I do want to point that one out.
Wow,
before
that's a very insightful. I actually hadn't thought about that.
Either did I, until you gave me the perspective shift in that moment, Locke. So thanks for that, mate.
Have you found someone?
Yeah. I tend to talk to you a lot about business, Locke. So, I think people have a lot of. Sorry, I think just having lots of conversations around business with other people who run businesses or who are in high leadership positions at certain companies. I think that helps. Just the diffusion of those conversations. So I wouldn't say I've got something as explicit as your advisory board, but that might be something that comes later down the track.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think good conversations are what it's about, isn't it? So
that's exactly right.
A lot of mentors in books too.
Yes, but your time, again, you're dedicating your time, and that's not your time isn't scalable. And so that's one of the major points of the book is to how do we increase scalability? And the core way to do that is through productising what it is that you do as a business. How about that for a segue, Locke?
Well, what does that mean?
Well, you mentioned Stapleton Agency. Which is the main business in the book, and they're like any other local agency that you might see. They're a consultancy or a typical service orientated business. They have a team of people that have a bunch of clients that they do business for, and they service the needs of those clients. Usually in a pretty tailored fashion, depending on what the needs are of those clients. These guys are in the marketing business, so they provide a whole bunch of, branding collateral, marketing campaigns, and all the different paraphernalia that goes with it, both in digital and print production. So that's the kind of crux of this business. And so just listing off those couple of things there, you can see that they need either a bunch of generalists that know how to operate across many, many different spaces, or they need to have, a bunch of specialists that operate in their own little silos and do things. But what you can probably see just from me describing that aspect is it's very difficult to scale something like that when every single customer's needs or client's needs changes depending on who they are. You're very at the whim of a customer in this business versus, if I want to go out and buy some coffee, I don't have a choice about, what I can't ask someone to give me a mixture of these beans over here, a mixture of these beans over here, and a mixture of these beans over here, and then grind them all up in different ways and put them all in a single bag, and then I'll take that home and start making my coffee. You're usually buying a bag of coffee from the supermarket or from the coffee store. That's the product. That is a product, and so it's about trying to shift what we discuss as that very tailored, very bespoke, custom need model into a more productized model, in that this is what you're getting off the shelf type thing. But that bit of coffee, that same bag of coffee, that fulfills my needs as a coffee drinker. That's all that I need. It's just about me understanding the fact that that is all that I need.
So what do you think defines if you were to describe that offering of coffee, what defines a product? What are the edges of a product? It's a pretty random question, but do you understand kind of the premise of it, or do I need to rephrase my question?
No, I understand the premise, mate. So let's pick one particular coffee, right? And this is the go-to product coffee, as opposed to a particular range of coffees. That one particular coffee it's a very standard process for how that coffee gets on the shelf as a starting point. Let's assume that I am already the customer. Getting that bag of coffee to the shelf is the same procedure for that company to fulfill each time. They also don't need to have in-house baristas to get that bag of coffee on the shelf. They just have to get the bag of coffee on the shelf. They don't need to make it as well. They don't have to have a specialist group of people sourcing coffee for that particular thing. They could, but in this case, they don't have to. They just need to get the bag of coffee onto the shelf. And there's probably a whole swath of other, they don't need to have people selling wine. They don't need to have people selling food and other things just to get that bag of coffee on the shelf. They're only putting the bag of coffee on the shelf. They're very niche. They're very specialized, very focused on that one thing. And that's, I think,
very interesting.
I think it's a fixed scope for what's included in doing that coffee. It's not we're going to have different ways of blending these bags with other bags for every single customer's needs as they come in the door to serve them.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I would say the other thing about it is that it's very sort of defined how it looks to the customer as well. So it has a particular label and has a particular look, and the package has, says what it is on it, and there's a lot of effort that goes into what the package says and how it says it. And how you get the most amount of information and marketing and branding onto that packet. So for a service business, the idea here is to basically turn your service into a product and productize your service as much as possible so you can systemize it. This is something I have not managed to achieve fully in my business, but it is something that that's very difficult to do, but even steps towards it help you a lot, I've found. Um, I've got an interesting sort of caveat or parenthesis to this discussion about products and services that is this. So I got told by one of my mentor that if you sell products, the best people at selling products sell their product as a service. And the best people who sell their services as a product. So if you go to the Apple store or something like that, they've wrapped, or you go to Mercedes or something, not that I have been in a Mercedes dealership, or go to Lamborghini or something.
You've been in one of those, though?
Every Saturday. No, I'm kidding. They wrap, well, I've got a Volkswagen, right? And they do this too. They wrap a bunch of services around their product to make it feel very much differentiated from the other products. If you go to the Apple store, it's a full service that you're getting there to buy that product.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go to a car dealership, they serve you coffee. They've got these sort of extra programs when you go to get your car service there. It's all very much, you get treated very like it's kind of bespoke to you. You feel like that. You go in and you're treated very well by the people. And they've wrapped all these other things around it. And then the opposite, if you sell a service, productizing your service is often a great idea because it makes it very defined and very able to be sort of made better and better and better. And because sometimes I found selling a service, which is I'm in a service business, it's very difficult to describe to customers what you actually do.
I think there's two things in there, mate, that I want to point out. One, I think the business environment that your business operates in is very, very complex. And I think there's a lot of things that are complex, but because of the varying needs of what it is that your business services, these are completely different projects, depending on what the client's projects are. It means that it's very hard to template out a lot of what you do. And so you need to look at other ways of templating out what you do as opposed to the actual specific output that it is that you do. And because you guys provide like engineering orientated services from a construction standpoint.
And now design.
Standpoint. Okay, just add in. Any others, mate?
No, that's it for now. But watch this space. We also do digital engineering and a lot of drone flights too now. So if you need one of those, hit me up on the Instagram comments.
And you'll be giving signatures after the episode.
Oh yeah.
So I think the space that you operate in, even the design business, mate, these are very specific to the need of the environment that you're designing or delivering for. It changes from every single one. And so it's very hard to template that up. Whereas you move into the Stapleton agencies, which is the topic of discussion in the book. Yes, they have different client needs, but they move into the logo business and they only start building logos. So they were offering this suite of different activities and they really honed in on we need to make the best possible logos, which was their core capability in the first place. And then they developed a specific process around how they do that and what's included in developing a logo and what is not included in developing a logo. As a result of that, they can set up the resources both from a people perspective and a technological perspective and all other capability perspective to enable the delivery of those services in the best possible way, even though it's a productized service, if you will. So I think the complexity of the environment that you operate in, like, has a real, it's an added bonus challenge, for you guys there. I don't think
Yeah, I would say
unsolvable
so.
though.
Well, I think that this is probably where I hit a bit of a beef with old John, is that you have to be super careful at that point where you're like, all right, we're only doing logos now.
Mm.
So I could probably do that and say, oh, we're only going to do estimating now. And that's all we do. We just do estimating and everyone else can get stuffed. Well, that's a pretty bold move. And really it really narrows you in. And I think it's got to be done with some nuance. So I'd be careful following that piece of advice, because you are really putting your eggs in one basket. And unless you've read the market really, really well, that could be problematic if you did it all at once.
This is exactly right, mate. I totally agree with you here in that when you are moving to that, this happens very quick in the book, and I think it's something that doesn't get, again, explicitly called out that probably should. You look at the startup methodology for developing a product, or how the startups develop products. There's this whole MVP cycle that happens, and there is a ton of market research that needs to happen in that, and continual market research feeding the beast of building any product, which is that needs to be intrinsically linked with the capabilities of the founder and the founding team, if you will, which is where you get into this product, founder, market, fit cycle. And so to just blindly choose one of these aspects of the service offering business can be very dangerous, because, as you say, that may not be the product, founder, market fit that you guys have as a business.
I would probably say, yeah. So what he's trying to say here is, and I'm sure it works if you get it right, is you need to basically make sure that your business doesn't rely too much on yourself. You've got to build a business that is ready to sell, even if you don't intend to sell it. So point 2 then is to really turn your business into a machine, in a good way. And to do that, you need to be focused. So productize what you're doing and start thinking about it as a process. So if you do logo design, you want the 5-step logo design process, which he goes through in the book. Part 1 is you go and see the customer. Part 2 is you come up with a number of sketches, just in black and white. Part 3 is you go and show them, et cetera, et cetera. And that's your standard way of doing it. And you'll get bloody good at doing that. But he's sort of saying, pick the best thing you're good at and just hone in on that. And I would agree with that to a point. But what I would say is that maybe you, where possible, don't just, pick the thing you're great at and maximize the return from that, but don't necessarily have to shut down everything else you're doing in the meantime. But you want to know what the drivers of success are in your business and then optimize the hell out of them.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The I think it's the cutting of the peripheral stuff that doesn't align with the business strategy that can be important.
Don't do stuff that's low leverage. Don't do stuff that doesn't serve you. Fire the customers who are a pain in the ass if you can. And then you're starting to get a system, aren't you? Then you're starting to get something that's going to generate returns and value that you can reinvest and make yourself even better. And as you start defining what you can do, other people can do it. So the stress that's on you, if you want to keep it at roughly the same size, is now gone. And that's a key point of his, is that it dramatically reduces the stress on the founder if you can start thinking and doing things in this way.
Yeah. And so, like, what's are those what do those types of businesses look like juxtaposed against those very service orientated, we will tailor and do everything that you need, you just tell us type businesses?
Well, I think rather than built to sell, the word I've been told, which I quite like, is investor ready. You want to have an investor ready business. And
just to really push on that, Locke, if you don't have an investor ready business, even if you've been running that business for 10 years, and you are the sole, you're going to get onto these in a second, you are the sole point of failure effectively in the business, your business is effectively worth nothing.
It's a job.
Yeah.
You built a job you can't quit. And it's very easy to get in that position. Now, what I would say on that too, again, not to try and add too much nuance to this, but
we love the nuance here, mate.
If you grow your business to like 10 people selling cupcakes or whatever, and you get that down to a fine art, you can step away as the owner. But you have a choice at that point. You can then push to open 2 stores or 3 stores. And then you need to come up with a whole new set of systems that are going to allow you to grow to that level. So therefore, you still need to be involved because you're now designing the next part of the machine, and that's your job. And that's where the founder needs to keep going. It's usually the founder who would be driven enough to do that. Very hard to outsource that. So if you're still aggressively growing your company, you are still going to be needed and involved in that sort of thing. But you want to be the kind of at the point where if you just decided to stay and grow at a very, organic rate, very stable, or not grow at all, you could just take a 6-month holiday and you'd come back and everything would be cool. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes total sense, right?
Because when you're growing, you have to build. You actually need what I found is you actually need the system in place. If you want to grow by 30%, you need the system in place that's going to be used when you're there. So if you're at 20 people in a services company, you need a system that can handle 40. So, and then you'll find you'll go to that. If you don't have that ready and you start growing, the growth will stop because it'll just break what you're doing.
It's exactly right, mate. Your capital expenditure to operate for every dollar of earning is totally out of whack if you don't establish that stuff.
I've done that, by the way.
I think
things have been very stretched. So
I think a lot of people do that, but there's another part in that, mate, which is yes, you've got the system in place to handle 40 customers or 40 people, but you also have the willingness to extract yourself from the daily motions of that. And a lot of people have there's a lot of tied in meaning. Meaningful work is so important. This is another Dalio point, and meaningful work provides a lot of purpose. And by completely disconnecting from that, it can be really challenging, particularly for what it is. It's like your business can be your baby in a sense. So it can be really hard to do that, not just from setting up the systems required to do it, but just parting ways with this thing that you've built and being able to be comfortable with others taking the reins.
Very difficult. And also it's very difficult for it not to become linked into your identity as well, which is dangerous, but almost somewhat inevitable.
And somewhat addictive, I think, as well. Look.
Yeah, because then you're really riding the volatility train. So I guess to come back to the question you actually asked me, we've come to the point where we've decided we need to build this business in a systemized way. to do that, we've honed in on what the business drivers are and productized whatever we're doing. Now we're during the process of productizing. Where do we want to get to be that is sort of investor ready? Well, I've kind of boiled it down to four main things. First one's key person risk. So we need to drive the company so it doesn't overly rely on one owner or one key person or a particular group. And that's kind of been what we've been talking around in this episode already. The second is key client risk, which this is a real pain in the ass if you've got this as well, because if you've got one client that gives you most of your work, it's a massive risk to the company and you're not properly diversified. So in this book, he says no greater than 15% of your revenue should come from one customer or client, because then you're kind of at the whim of when they want to pay you. You jump when they say jump at all costs, and it just becomes really problematic. Number three is your cash. So most businesses fail because of cash, not necessarily profitability. Seems to be the maybe apocryphal tale that people tell, but seems to be somewhat true, is that seems to be the hardest thing that I found to understand about cash flows and how that actually works. So you want to be positive cash flow where your money's coming in at a greater rate than your expenses are going out in terms of timing. And so that's very important.
Let's really dive into this one, Locke, just from a product versus service perspective. If you are selling a product off the shelf, you pay for it when you get the product. As soon as you take the product off the shelf and you pay for it at that point in time. With a service, it doesn't work like that. You engage for the service, and it's not usually until the completion of that service, or traditionally the completion of that service, which could be weeks or months down the track, that there is pay for that. And usually on that payment, there's a payment term, and that payment term could be anything between 7 usually to 30, 60, 90 more days. You can imagine the impact that has, because the service business is paying. There's costs going out the door from prior to day zero, to be honest, to win that project and to engage for that project. So you as a business owner need to be paying for all those costs, but you're only recouping those costs, could be months later before you're seeing any recuperation for that specific cost that's outlaid out the door, as opposed to if you had a product, there's some initial infrastructure set up that needs to happen, but your product is being paid for at the time that the product is being given in exchange.
There is, that's it. So it can be very difficult, and that's where there's different strategies if you run a productized business to be able to get payment up front, or build to order and that kind of thing. That can help a lot. And really, if you don't have good cash flows, it stunts your growth as well. Lastly, I put in here pipeline risk. And the pipeline risk is kind of like how much work you've got in front of you guaranteed. So if you're just copying orders every time someone kind of wants something, they ring you and they get it straight away, and you're at the whim of an unpredictable pipeline. So it's very risky, and you got a lot of sleepless nights because you're not really sure where the next sale's coming from. If you can create and sell your product in a way that means the orders are kind of guaranteed into the future, then it becomes a much more predictable and I suppose valuable business because of that. Now, that's not always possible, but it should be the goal, and you should be trying to find ways to do that, or as much as possible. So if you can optimize those four things, so the key person risk, the key client risk, the cash flows, and your pipeline risk, you're going to be building a company that someone probably wants to buy one day. Even if you don't, you're going to have a company that's much more pleasant to work in as an owner than if you have the opposite.
Yes. How do you guarantee, mates, the orders for a product business? What do you mean by guaranteed of orders for the product business? From a pipeline perspective, yeah.
It could be something like a subscription service or a retainer or something like that. Now that's kind of become quite popular. And software as a service is kind of productized, servicing, turning a product into a service in some ways, in the way but it's sold per month. And even the biggest companies went to this model because it gives you guaranteed earnings over the longer term and it's more predictable. And you'll see when you go to those websites that they'll offer you a discount to sign up for 12 months. And that's kind of why, a big reason why. So it gives them predictability and guarantees that cash at the time, or that sale, sorry. You can also do it in a way that your customer might buy something up front, but you offer services that have a bit of a tail on it. So you might initially do something up front, like install an air conditioner, but you do the maintenance on it every 6 months for the next 5 years, for just a random example. And all of a sudden you've got some sort of baseline income that you can rely on.
Yeah, yeah. And not to mention, mate, usually in making the shift as one of your key points is like the key client risk. To reduce key client risk, you have to increase the number of customers and not be so reliant on one particular customer. Yeah. And so more customers is more data. And eventually more data moving into like the space of consumer data is that you can have an idea of when sales are coming in for particular types of products. And this is where you, again, move to companies like Amazon. And they have these unbelievable close predictions about what their sales are going to be for, almost down to a product level across the year.
Well, one of their biggest innovations was Prime, which gives them a baseline revenue, but also makes you stick to their service because you get these benefits and you're going to be coming back. So that's an interesting when you start thinking about these things. But I think your point's a very insightful one, that pipeline risk, all these risks are really intertwined. And if you're fixing your key client risk, you're probably also minimizing some pipeline risk as well at the same time. Because if you've got a diversified customer base, it's unlikely that it'll all drop off at once, unless you're heading into some sort of black swan event. And so that's where other forms of diversification are quite good too.
I think if I was to add one point here, mate, I would add the point of technology is visible. And it may not be visible to the customer itself, but it's certainly visible to the internal team. And not visible in the sense that we have to grudgingly get through doing things ourselves as the employees and work through like the as you were talking about earlier in the episode, these real legacy painful softwares, but they're just little things that happen in the background or little templating that's done that vastly increase the leverage of the organization. Because there's like an emphasis on operational excellence in that way. If you can offer the same product at half the price of someone else, other than them going, what the fuck is wrong with it, maybe. Except for those specific group of customers.
Well, yeah, this is a bloody good point. But I'd challenge you there and say what Seth Godin would say about that is that, well, the customer wants to pay a higher price for that product because it's going to make them feel like it's the quality that it is. The fact that you're producing it for less and increasing your margins, that's for you. However, it gives you the lever that means that you can drop your price lower if you really need to.
Yeah, but you can also spend more money on the marketing around that specific product to make your product look like it's worth more compared to the other person that can't spend that money on their marketing budget to make it worth more. So,
or you can invest it in the product itself.
Exactly. So,
not easy to do all this in practice, but if you're working towards this, you're making some progress, I think.
Yeah, I think there's some really key points. The other one, which is maybe quite controversial for the service business mode, is the nuance of language, even both internally and externally, which I thought was quite interesting. Is shifting the perspective of, we call our customers as opposed to clients. You know, we are a business, not a firm, if you will, and little nuance changes in service versus a product that we're selling, and all these nuance changes in language, in not just shifting the customer's perspective, because you're priming the customers to say, oh, this is a product, therefore I'm going to pay for this at this point, you know, at the outset, as opposed to a service which you usually pay for after the job is done and completed and to standard. So there's a shift in the customers, but there's also a shift in the actual internal team around this kind of this wording. Now, it runs into the same complications as what you were talking about earlier in, you know, maybe the likes of Apple. I haven't been to an Apple store in a long time, but maybe they refer to their customers as clients. I don't know, you know, and they've kind of flipped.
Yeah, they've gone the other way, but like that's okay because they're selling products.
That's exactly right. It's almost like they've nailed this. They've, you know, absolutely nailed the product thing, so that they're adding back in the kind of flair and excitement that you sometimes get with a client-orientated model.
Yeah, and they've got a classic sell it up front. You can get the extras, but then you're paying for the apps and the songs and the this and the that, and that gives them that nice tail as well. It's fascinating, and I really like that point around the language. Language is super powerful. And the last thing I want to say around this kind of like characteristics of investor ready is that this is probably where it comes back to our slight knock on their approach, is that he kind of goes the opposite way and focuses solely on one thing, which is to do logos in this instance. And that's kind of the opposite and that's to make sure the product is great. But to me, you want to be building out other ones so that you're diversifying your product as well as not. So you're never just doing logos. You do logos, but whether you put it under a different brand or whatever, but you start to do other things, and that's a form of diversification as well. Because if all of a sudden people decide they don't like your 5-step process, you literally have nothing.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's not about your 5-step process, mate, but it's more about this latest innovation in AI that now automatically does logos at the same equivalence as what your product's providing, that it protects, like these huge potential risks for the company. But the key is to take the systems, the machine that you've built for the logos and building those logos, and take that same system and add something on that fits into that system, not just going out and randomly picking something because it's diversity.
No, and probably the best way to do that is listen to what the people you're doing logos for also ask you for. That's a good place to start. So now we've built a business that's ready to sell, mate. How do we do it?
Well, it would be trite. Is that the word? Is that the cliche word?
Yeah.
It'd be trite of us to talk about the book called Built to Sell without talking about selling.
Yeah. This is the bit that neither of us have done. But
yes. Yeah, this is great. Yeah, we're well and truly out of our depth here. So, although you've probably done quite a bit of the part A of this point, and then not so much the part B of this point. So part A is actually selling to these customers. And there's a couple of really interesting points here that moving from a service-orientated offering where you can have salespeople, but often the salespeople are also the ones doing a lot of the doing too. They're doing the execution. Within a productized orientated business, you can actually have people dedicated to nothing but sales. And so that can be really, really positive for pipeline, particularly in the B2B space, which is, business to business space, which is somewhere that you do need to have some sales presence. If you are going to hire a salesperson, though, you should hire two of them. I think that's a really interesting point, and is the natural competition is really important there. And coupled with hiring two people is having some like visible metrics about how the sales or how the acquisition of users or whatever it is going.
Yeah. So you want to be able to measure and then pit these bulldogs against one another is kind of what he says, doesn't it?
Yeah, healthy competition and picking people that can sell products, not sell the customized offering that is usually included in a service, or get used to adding on little additions for the clients every single time. They need to be able to sell the value in what it is that you are providing out of the box. I love taking from the world of startups here, where you see like the big screen in the movies of how many users we have on board. Oh, we've just reached 500,000 users type thing. And everyone getting behind those metrics, everyone getting behind that, that core driver for the whole business. It really creates a motivated, energized feel around it,
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. This is where you want to make sure that the people, whoever it is, whether it's internal or external, are doing this in a way that fits your culture and values as a business. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Exactly right. The you look at the Wolf of Wall Street, and they slam the bloody thing into the order ticket into the vacuum thing, and they ring a bell or some shit. That same hype and that same like almost testosterone induced vigor isn't for all businesses there, but all businesses do have their own. There is the version of that applies to each business, and I think that's about finding what that is that fits within the culture of the business. The other thing that all this does is it proves that you aren't required in order to sell what it is that you're doing, and this is huge because if you are required elements of actually getting business, then there's a huge flaw. There's a huge problem in being investor ready. In fact, it almost rules out any possibility of being investor ready if you are that key risk in that pipeline. So, but being able to hire more than just one also means that there's a scalable methodology. It's not this salesperson that you've had in the team for 10 years that just intrinsically knows as much as you do about the company either. So I think that's selling the product versus selling a service here, mate, from a selling your business perspective.
So that helps you get the critical mass that means that people are going to want to buy your business, right? So, or something like that. So then it comes to actually, okay, you've decided it's time to perhaps pack up and sell, and then go and live in Barbados or something.
Is that your
Don't know
place
why.
of choice? Barbados?
No, it just came to me. It sounds like a nice place,
Barbados. Yeah. I
So
haven't been there, mate. I
how do
don't
you
know
do
much
it?
about it.
How do you do it? Well, you'll find out when you sell your business. So what's the go?
So, you need 2 years of financial statements within the productized orientated business. So this is one of the things that is said at the outset is when you are looking to make this shift into a more productized orientated business, a more sellable business, that you need to have 2 years behind you. That's just track record. It's very, very quite standard. It's also, it's a standard timeline even for receiving business loans and things, even if you are a service-orientated business, for example. So which, it's very like almost black and white type, thing there. But it's important to realize that it's not a we can just productize our business tomorrow and then we can sell it type thing. There is a bit of a journey involved.
Yeah, really hard to build a business that is able to be sold.
Exactly right. And then obviously find an expert to help out. It can be similar to enlisting a property advocate or a buyer's advocate in purchasing a property type thing. Particularly in bigger purchases. It's a bit of a shark tank out there, mate. So you're better off giving away a small potential percentage of that transaction to getting a far superior outcome. But you just need to, as with any expert you bring on board, you just need to know that they've got their work cut out for them.
Yeah, I think that absolutely. I think the biggest point here is you need to make sure that you're able to show a growth trajectory beyond what you've done so that the person who buys it can grow the business and increase the value so they get a return on their investment. So you need to create a platform that you can say, hey, if you take this on, we can take it to the moon, The less it relies on you, the less you'll have to hang around. And this is assuming you don't want to, which, to me is kind of hard because, to me it's hard to build a company and put all that into it if you didn't really want to be there at the end, if it was always about just selling the thing. But that's just my approach. At the event, all things come to an end, so eventually you want to at least sell it if you do want to do something else.
This is exactly right. It's like the irony of this entire book is the guy doesn't even end up selling his business because he loves what it is and loves what it's doing, and he's basically jumping into wanting to sell the business because he's effectively resentful and about it. It's not doing what he, had kind of set out to build his life to look like. He's running around 24 hours a day, 7 days a week type thing. And it's just not what he set out to do. And so quite often what happens is he's been able to achieve a much more desirable life by the end of the book. It's a fairy tale. And because of that, he's now loving what it is. He's rekindled himself with the enjoyment of what it is that he does within his work. So, but eventually he will retire. And if he does stay with that same business forever, he will at some point in time want to sell the entirety of it or just gradually sell down his ownership to others and get them involved. And so from that perspective, if you can't sell anything, then when the business finishes and shuts its doors, there's no extra benefit. Whereas if you've got a valuable, sellable, investor-ready business, when you do shut the doors at some point in time down the track, even if the business doesn't shut its doors, then you are going to make a potentially substantial, almost like retirement kitty there. So it's something to bear in mind.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I really enjoyed this book, and going back through it has made me remember the bits that I've forgotten and should pay more attention to. I think that there's a lot to learn from it, and if anything, it gives you some freedom as someone who is an owner of a company.
That's exactly right, mate. It's an excellent read. It's a perspective shifter, as we say, and I do come back to this book time and time again for a reason.
So, a closing quote, because we haven't got one, I'm just going to say how good the internet in Geneva is. No lag. We're actually able to have a proper conversation.
Yeah. Well, I'm in my new studio, Locke.
Thank you, Switzerland. It's almost like we're actually face to face. So it's great.
This is like the most hassle-free episode we've recorded in the last 12 months. So I'm stoked about this year already, even though Melbourne has just gone back into confinement.
Yeah, absolutely. No, good times.
Well, that was one hell of an ending quote for the episode, mate. So
thank you, Geneva. All right, see ya.
See ya.